The sun is starting to set on what's been a pretty good period of role-playing games. We had, of course, that wave of Baldur's Gate 3, Starfield, Phantom Liberty, all those games in a row, and even if one of those games is maybe of questionable quality, it was a pretty good run. I think we were fortunate. We've had other games like Lords of the Fallen recently, Lies of P, if you like Dark Souls types of games. So quite a few games like that, single player, no microtransactions, no cash store. We've had all those in a pretty short time frame. But soon, people are going to be finishing those titles. They're going to be looking for the next big thing. And I think that's going to be a little bit difficult to find because there are AAA RPG games coming out over the next year or so. Supposedly, Dragon Age 4. I mean, BioWare now, you're probably coping if you think that game is going to be your savior. But there is Dragon's Dogma 2. People are looking forward to it. There's surely going to be the odd game coming out in the role-playing space that looks good. However, you may have to step out of your comfort zone a little bit if you're going to find something of high quality. You're probably going to have to look under a few rocks. They're probably not all going to be advertised to you. You're mainly going to have the AAA games advertised to you, and you may have to do a bit of digging to find games of high quality, games that are similar to Baldur's Gate 3 and the like, given they don't come around all the time, and often the AAA publishers are trying to shove something down your throat that is heavily monetized. And the games I'm going to show you today, certainly not heavily monetized, at least it doesn't seem so, and they are made by indie developers for the most part. So we're going to have a look at a few. I'm on an RPG enthusiast website, and there's at least 5 games I'm going to show you, maybe 6. And the first one here is Archaelund, if I'm saying that correctly. I found this interesting because it combines first-person exploration with third-person turn-based combat, and I haven't really seen that. Maybe there's a game out there like it, but I can't remember one. So basically it's like the Elder Scrolls when you're exploring the world, but when you get into combat, instead of just sort of spamming an action combat system, spamming spells, sort of throwing your mace, your sword around, you go into a grid-based combat system a bit like something like Baldur's Gate 3. So having a look at the trailer, and I'm just going to bring this up in YouTube, otherwise it'll be low quality. I want to watch this because it does look pretty good. The exploration that you see here, it doesn't look bad. It honestly looks as good as Starfield, really, and hopefully the exploration is better. But if we have a look here, the environment's pretty good for an indie studio. I'm probably not a huge graphics enthusiast, so some people might pick out the flaws, but I think it looks okay. We've got the actual combat here, and I mean, it looks pretty good in terms of skills and the depth. I'm hoping it really gets there. It is a party-based game, so even though that Elder Scrolls exploration, you do have a full party like the Baldur's Gate games, like many other titles in that vein. The UI, if that's important to you, it looks a bit lacking. The UI, it reminds me of EverQuest 1 or something, so perhaps that's something they are working on. But it's surprising to me because the presentation during exploration was quite good. So to see this UI a little bit odd, it looks a little bit amateurish, but we'll continue on. And you can sort of see that you encounter enemies and it pulls you into that grid-based combat. So I do like that from a strategic point of view. I think they've made the right decision, focusing on 2 areas where you can build on strengths. And what I mean by that is, it's rare that you get a first-person game that actually has really good combat. And I also think that games like Baldur's Gate 3 with isometric systems and isometric gameplay style, the reason that's done seems to be because it suits the combat. The exploration, it's fine in isometric view, but I don't think that necessarily needs to be the case. I don't think you would build an isometric game because of exploration. I think it is because of the combat. So there's no reason not to do what these developers are doing. I think it's an interesting take. We've got some generic spider enemies here. You can see a few different settings. You've got your fields, you've got your caves, it looks like haunted houses or whatever we just saw before. And it pulls us back into the world. Does look a little bit empty. I assume this is going to be something they expand on. But hopefully they do know their limits. They don't try and get too ambitious with a world that's too big. I think that's always a massive problem. I keep referring back to Starfield, but it's on my mind when I think of exploration that it tried to be too big, I think. And a game that sort of knows its place, they know they're indie developers, they're not going to make a AAA game. They should go for something smaller scale, at least in terms of the world. It does say Early Access 2022 here. I mentioned these are upcoming games I'm showing you. It hasn't actually come out yet. So if we jump back here, it's actually coming out in January, and that is the Early Access. So that'll allow people to dive in, give feedback, which they hopefully act on. I'm sure there's going to be a few issues. But if we have a look through, they sort of sum up what's happening with this game. Exploration as you remember it. You can play Archaelund your own way. Take your party of adventurers through a vast open world and explore as you wish. Find secrets, unexpected trouble. Deep and engaging character progression. You've got a career-based system. Your characters will start out as street ruffians, squires, hunters, and later on you can move into a new career with more prestigious roles like knight, law seeker, assassin, and more. So it sounds interesting. Someone has said here it's basically a reverse JRPG, which makes sense, I suppose. I can't think of a first-person JRPG. So perhaps that's one to look out for if you like that vibe, the, I suppose, interesting take on first-person and third-person. Now, there's Colony Ship here. This is made by a developer who made a game called Age of Decadence, I think it was. It's a indie RPG that's pretty renowned in that kind of hardcore CRPG space. Released in 2015, so a while ago now. Now, Colony Ship, it looks to be more of a sci-fi game, maybe a bit of Fallout potentially in there as well. Fallout influence, the older Fallouts from what I've seen in the trailer. It is out on early access, but they are releasing more and more content. And I believe within the next 6 months, the entire game's going to be there. So it's not one of those early access titles where it sits there for 6 years, never seems to get to the finish line. This one seems to be ready, and the developer has released a game that was well received before, so this could be a good one. And we'll jump into this trailer too, because I saw this years ago, but I haven't revisited it since, because I hate when a game's announced that looks really good, and then you know it's going to be that 4 or 5 year wait. So I've sort of sat back a bit, and now that it's closer to release, it'll be great to see it. So it's made in Unreal. So I'm guessing we're going to be seeing a 3D game. I've forgotten exactly what it's like. Starfarer is bound for a new world. So as the name suggests, set on a ship. You've got your character creation, and if we jump back just a little bit, looks interesting. Looks like it has a fair bit of depth. You've got your feats. You've got your different skills, so probably something to analyze if you're really interested in that. They mention followers as well, so it looks like it's not just single character. You can potentially have followers like the older Fallouts as well, potentially multiple. Hopefully the skills and the feats are interesting. The art style looks okay. Age of Decadence, their previous game, not a lot going on the art front. This one seems to have a bit more to it. I'm definitely seeing a bit of Fallout influence there. Different factions. Honest, something general store. Got your dialogue. And the combat itself looks interesting. Reminds me a bit of something like a Wasteland 3, a game I enjoyed. Probably one of the more recent CRPGs I've enjoyed in recent time. So hopefully it's along similar lines. And you've got your different dialogue choices, for instance. Let's have a look at that. And something I'll say about this game is I was going through some of the Steam forums, and some people had concerns that you could really easily lock yourself out of quest paths and brick yourself in the game. Apparently that isn't the case. The person who raised those concerns may have been incorrect, so they seem to have done a fair bit of work on it. Again, this game's been in development for a long time, and it is a studio that does seem to know their limits. I don't think one playthrough is going to take you 100 hours. One playthrough may take you sort of 30 hours, 40 hours. But if you want to go back, new playthrough is entirely different. That's what their previous game was like, that you could have almost a unique experience if you went down a different path. And this one might be similar. It's sounding similar. It's not like one of those games where you only make choices on quests right at the last second and the actual content you engage with is rarely any different. So it looks good. I imagine it's going to be a success, at least in its niche. So Warhammer 40k Road Trader, this is probably the most mainstream game I'm going to show you. Many people will be aware of this. I've never been a massive Warhammer person. I've just never gotten into the Warhammer universe, I guess. So I haven't really played many of the video games for that reason. I felt I should get into that first, maybe one day, before exploring some of them, which do sound pretty good. But this one intrigued me because it is made by Owlcat Games, who are responsible for the recent Pathfinder video games that are both very good. They're quite niche in the sense that they're not as mainstream as a Baldur's Gate 3, but they are very well made. They are rough around the edges. If you dive into them when they first come out, their games, so both of the Pathfinder titles, you probably had some difficulties. You probably ran into glitches and a lot of jank. But over time, they tend to fix them. And underneath the surface, you do have a game that's very well made, has a lot of depth, and certainly an abundance of content. They are not shy from sort of throwing everything at the wall, seeing what sticks and putting it in that game, because if you're looking for a game that's going to absorb you for hundreds of hours, they do a good job at that. I'm going to have a bit of a look at this particular trailer. So this is a gameplay trailer. It was released a little while ago, but the game's coming out very soon in December, so not far away either. I wonder if that's going to be the world map, because it looks a little bit like the Pathfinder ones.
It is the hunting ground of the rogue traders, unique and powerful servants of the Imperium.
I don't know a lot about the Warhammer universe once again, so the story and if what you're seeing sort of lines up with what you'd expect. I assume they're doing a good job. The reception looks to be pretty positive. But one thing I will say is that Owlcat Games, their presentation is not really their strong suit, and part of that might be because of budget, but they usually have fairly generic art styles. The Pathfinder games, not massive ones to write home about in terms of the graphics, in terms of the art. So what you actually see here, I don't think this would appeal to the average mainstream gamer. They'd see this and just think it perhaps doesn't look very good. But I know that under the surface, there's going to be a fair bit of depth here. Whether it's as good as the Pathfinder games, we'll have to see. They're obviously approaching a different style. You've got those sort of Warhammer-y elements in there that are a bit different, a bit fantasy in a different way to your swords and sorcery. But looks pretty good, I think. I imagine it's going to have high-quality quests. It's going to have great companions, exploration. So it's something, if I'm going to play a Warhammer game, I will probably check this one out first. There's that world map again. They put tons of stuff on that world map. I just remember hundreds of hours in those Pathfinder games. I spent a lot of time there. So this one, again, it's coming out in December. So not far away either. Hopefully it's good. Hopefully it's another win for Owlcat Games. Because again, there's not many great developers out there that haven't had a stinker or something to kind of sour things. Even, I mentioned Phantom Liberty, but CD Projekt Red, I think, still have some ground to make up. But Owlcat Games have been pretty good. Their games released a little bit broken, but they are an indie studio, and I can forgive them. If you wait maybe 12 months after the game comes out, if you want that polished experience, I'm sure you will get it. In the meantime, if you don't mind, you'll get a game that probably has heaps of content. This one's a little bit funny, the Passageway of the Ancients. It says it's a Baldur's Gate-like RPG, and sort of going through here, looking at character creation, this looks like those games that came out in the early 2000s when 3D graphics were very new. So you'll have to sort of adjust to that, I suppose, if you want to enjoy this. It's another game where if graphics are your thing, you may be a little bit disappointed. The screenshots I see here, they remind me a little bit of old school RuneScape, and I should say classic RuneScape. I mean not current classic RuneScape, before then, that one from the late 90s where it was 2D. The different graphics, the health bars and things, they just give me that vibe. And as we go down, there is a bit more information about the backstory here. So apparently the game has been made by 2 Texan men in their 70s. So if you want to check out that backstory, what's going on there, you can see exactly what's happening there. There was actually a game called Hero U, and if anyone's familiar with Quest for Glory, it was made by the creators of that game. 2 people in their 70s who put this game called Hero U together a few years ago. And that story's a little bit tragic. I think they had to remortgage their house or something like that. It was a big financial trouble for them. But I hope it worked out in the end, because they sounded like nice people who developed that game. And this looks similar. 2 men in their 70s. They're going back to the classic style. And we're going to watch this trailer, because I think it will be, at worst, a bit of fun. Okay, so it just has that vibe like they're random assets that have been meshed together. Okay, so we've got the lockpicking minigame. Now, this reminds me of the one from Fallout 3, and I'm sure that there was a screenshot of another lockpicking minigame somewhere. Here it is. So this reminds me of the one of Oblivion, and then you've got the one from Fallout 3 here. So it seems like they love their minigames. You've got another puzzle here, but certainly the lockpicking ones they're fans of. There's a fair bit going on. The young tower tree was roused from a tormented twilight. And they've got some cutscenes in there too. Again, the art assets, they seem to just be pulled from random games. It looks very old school, if anything. Again, that early 2000s vibe, it's going to be one to keep an eye on, I'm sure. There's no release date for an early access or a full release, but something I thought would be worth mentioning. If you really want that old school sort of style, that really is the 90s. It's not just trying to pretend to be the 90s. It is the late 90s, early 2000s, for sure. There's also Drova, and this isn't quite a Baldur's Gate-like. It's not a party-based game, but it is supposedly inspired by the Gothic series. They're some of my favorite games, so anything of that style I'm going to be wanting to check out. It comes out in 2024. There is a playable teaser. I've held off on that because I want to experience the whole thing at once. I tend to steer clear from demos unless I'm really desperate. But I think they're making the right choice here. They haven't tried to make a 3D game. They've done a 2D game, which probably makes sense for a small developer. Piranha Bytes, who make Gothic, they make the Illic series. They've always struggled, I think, with jank and getting sort of the mainstream support that they probably need to get the sales they'd require to sort of expand their budget. So something like this seems like the way to go. And we're going to have a bit of a look at this as well, because the trailer looks quite good, and feedback's been very positive. The main plot, quite simple, I believe. It's not a game where you start off as the hero of the story. You are a nobody, you've got to prove yourself. Environments look okay. I imagine the exploration is going to be really good, because that is one of my favourite things about the Gothic games. Choosing a faction, classic part of Gothic. And I imagine the factions are not just there to be your friend. It's not like Elder Scrolls, where every faction is just waiting for you with open arms, and they essentially just are asking you to be their leader within about 5 minutes. No, you've got to prove yourself. I imagine it's going to be the same here. Combat is going to be very interesting, because in Gothic, it's ruthless. You can't just attack anything. You have to really plan which mobs am I safe to attack at my level. There's no level scaling. I imagine there isn't here either. And you do have to really take the world as it is. It's dangerous. You cannot just run into the forest, or you're going to get mauled by, what are these, wargs or wolves. You've got to be very careful. You've got to know your limits until you get more powerful. And then eventually you'll reach the point where you can destroy everything. But it will take a long while to get there. So Drova. So this is one I am looking forward to. And whenever it comes out, if word of mouth is sounding positive, I'm almost certainly going to buy it. There is Dark Envoy. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this one. It releases in 6 hours, at least where I am right now. The reviews have been a little bit middling on this game. It's, if we look here, a tactical real-time combat game. There's co-op as well. But it was probably one a month or two ago I was keen to maybe check out, but reviews have been a bit middling, and by reviews I don't just mean IGN, I'm talking about people who are pretty experienced with role-playing games. Everything they're saying is maybe a little bit mid, maybe something to check out if you're really interested in the setting. And if we bring up the Steam page, the setting looks interesting. They call it Guns and Sorcery. That's the sort of world. Looks okay. Maybe a little bit Fortnite-y in this screenshot, but otherwise, there are reviews out there. You can start to sort of see what people are saying. The last one I want to speak about, though, is a game called Monomyth. This game has been around for quite some time. I believe it's actually a sole developer, unless he's built out a team since then. He had a Kickstarter ages ago, and the game itself looks really, really good. This is not really a Baldur's Gate 3 like. It's a first-person kind of dungeon crawly sort of game it is looking like. Perhaps there's a bit more to it. There were NPCs there, but the world itself, for one person developing this game, it does look fantastic. Whatever he's done, he's gotten this right, the presentation right. It looks really nice. It looks to be a bit of variety, some puzzles. Not sure how the combat actually is, but it looks nice at the very least. And there you go, there's a bit more to it. You can interact with the world. It's not purely combat. The world itself's not just a setting, a presentation. You can interact. Also the variety. It's not just sort of one Darkrim setting. There's been a fair bit there. Ice, fire, caves, swamps, fire golems. So again, this game has been around for a little while now, but the developer is constantly posting updates. So it's not one of those one-man projects that just sort of dies off. They seem to be pretty hard at work on it, and hopefully it's around the corner, at least something playable, because it seems to have been around since 2017, so a long, long time. But again, a one-man team, probably working part-time at best on it. So it'll probably take a little while, but there's always positive things being said about it. It's interesting that one person can develop a title that looks that good. Whether it comes out and it genuinely is as good as it looks, we'll have to see, but they're making a good first impression. There are games that come out with thousands of, let's say hundreds, I won't use hyperbole, developers who show off a game and it looks terrible. They've done a bad job at simply presenting it, let alone it coming out and actually being good. So the fact that one person has been able to do that is a credit to them. Hopefully it can be a positive story. It can come out and be really nice, and I'll continue to follow it. But that's all the games for today. I think there's some nice ones there. Trying to get something as good as Baldur's Gate 3, I think you'll have to really hold out for that. But if you want to support good RPGs, there's some good indie games out there. And thanks very much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.